The heavy oak doors of the bridal suite slammed shut, locking Sarah inside with a man she had only known as a broken beggar. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she looked at Isaiah, the man she had just spent her life savings to save it through marriage. But as the candles flickered, the impossible happened. The man who hadn't moved a muscle in 3 years, stood up. Isaiah's frame was no longer slumped, he towered over her, his eyes burning with a chilling, predatory intensity. Sarah gasped, her wedding veil snagging on her trembling fingers. You are faking it. All of it. Isaiah took a slow, deliberate step toward her, the shadows stretching across his face like a mask. I wasn't faking the need for a wife, Sarah, he rasped, his voice a deep, haunting growl. I was testing who would be worthy of my secrets. And tonight, the real contract begins. In the quiet, dust-blown corners of Willow Creek, Sarah was known for 2 things, her unwavering virtue and her desperate poverty. At 21, while other girls like the spiteful Abina dreamed of silk dresses and city lights, Sarah's only dream was to hear her grandfather, Papa Smith, breathe without pain. Papa Smith was the man who had raised her, but now, his lungs were failing, and the village doctor had delivered a death sentence. Without the surgery, Sarah, he won't see the next moon. Desperation is a dangerous thing. It leads a good woman to do the unthinkable. When Pastor Barb stood before the congregation and announced that a mysterious, crippled stranger named Isaiah was offering a fortune to any woman willing to be his hands and feet in marriage, the village erupted in mockery. Abina laughed the loudest, calling it a curse. But Sarah didn't see a curse. She saw a miracle for Papa Smith. She didn't know that by stepping forward to save one life, she was walking straight into a web of lies that would change her destiny forever. Will Sarah survive the dark secrets of her new husband, or has she traded her freedom for a lie? This story is about to take a turn that no one in Willow Creek saw coming. Before we reveal the terrifying truth Isaiah is hiding in, do our small family a quick favor. If you believe that a heart of gold like Sarah's deserves a happy ending, smash that like button right now. It tells the algorithm to share this story of hope and mystery with more people. And if you want to be the first to know the shocking twist in the finale, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You don't want to miss what happens when the crippled groom finally reveals his true face. Are you ready? Let me also know where you're watching from in the comment section. The morning mist clung to the thatched roof of the small cottage like a damp shout, echoing the heaviness in Sarah's chest. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and wood smoke, a fragrance that had defined her childhood but now felt like the smell of a fading life. Sarah moved softly across the creaking floorboards, her calloused hands steadying a bowl of warm broth. She sat at the edge of the narrow cot where Papa Smith lay, his frame skeletal beneath the heavy patchwork quilt. He was the man who had taught her to read by candlelight and shielded her from the world's cruelty after her parents were gone. To the village, he was just an old man whose time had come. To Sarah, he was the horizon, the only word she had ever truly known. "Drink, Papa," she whispered, pressing the wooden spoon to his pale lips. He tried to smile, but the expression was cut short by a violent, racking cough that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Each spasm was a wet, tearing sound that made Sarah's own lungs ache in sympathy. As she rubbed his back, the fragile peace of the morning was shattered by a heavy, rhythmic thudding at the front door. Sarah hurried to open it, only to find Mr. Silas, the village debt collector, standing on the threshold with a ledger tucked under his arm and a sneer tucked under his mustache. Behind him stood 2 burly men, their eyes wandering over the modest furniture with predatory intent. "The extension is over, Sarah," Silas announced, his voice cutting through the quiet like a rusted blade. Your grandfather's medical debts have piled higher than the hills. Either you produce 40 pieces of silver by sunset, or we seize this shack and everything in it, including that bed he's dying on. Inside, another fit of coughing erupted, more desperate than the last. Papa Smith gasped for air, his hand reaching out into the empty space, searching for Sarah. She looked from the dying man to the cold eyes of the collector. She had spent every waking hour sewing, cleaning, and battering, but she was drowning in a sea of interest and misfortune. Please, she pleaded, her voice trembling but her gaze fierce. He won't survive a move to the streets. Give me 1 more week. Silas merely laughed, a hollow sound that signaled the end of mercy. The law doesn't care about a girl's devotion, Sarah. It only cares about gold. As they turned to leave, promising to return at dusk to cast them out, Sarah felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over her. The goodness she had worn like a garment her whole life wouldn't save him. She didn't need a prayer anymore, she needed a miracle, no matter how dark the price might be. The iron bell of the village square tolled with a heavy, ominous resonance, summoning the people of Willow Creek to an emergency meeting. Sarah arrived with the dust of the morning's confrontation still on her hem, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. The square was crowded, filled with the murmurs of neighbors who smelled drama in the humid air. At the center of the podium stood Pastor Babs, his black robe billowing slightly in the breeze, his expression unreadable behind his silver-rimmed spectacles. Beside him sat a figure that seemed to drain the light from the afternoon sun. It was a man, slumped and motionless in a rusted, creaking wheelchair. A heavy, multi-ton wool blanket was draped over his lap and shoulders, obscuring his form, while a wide-brimmed hat cast a deep shadow over his face. This was Isaiah. He looked like a discarded relic, a broken soul forgotten by time. The whispers in the crowd turned to sharp titters of mockery. Abina stood near the front, a cruel smirk playing on her lips as she pointed at the stranger's gnarled, motionless hands. Pastor Babs raised his arms, silencing the crowd. Brethren, he began, his voice booming with a practiced authority. I come to you with a proposition born of both mercy and necessity. This man, Isaiah, is a traveler seeking a sanctuary, and a wife. A mysterious benefactor has entrusted me with a great sum of gold. This benefactor seeks a woman of pure virtue, one willing to commit her life to the care of this broken man at a distant estate. In exchange for this sacred vow of marriage and service, every debt, medical, silver, or land, owed by that woman's family will be wiped clean in an instant. A cold silence fell over the square. The price was clear, a lifetime of servitude to a man who couldn't even lift his own head. Who among you, the pastor challenged, is selfless enough to take up this cross? Abina let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Marry a ghost in a chair. I'd sooner marry the soil. The crowd shifted, eyes downcast, no one willing to trade their youth for a shadow. But Sarah saw only the image of Papa Smith gasping for air on his deathbed. She saw the debt collector's ledger and the cold street waiting for her grandfather. Her legs felt like stone as she took a single, trembling step forward. The crowd gasped, their mocking whispers dying in their throats. Sarah looked Pastor Babs in the eye, her voice small but unbreakable. I will do it, she said, the words tasting like ash. I will marry him. As she spoke, she felt a sudden, piercing gaze from beneath the stranger's hat, a flash of something dark and sharp that didn't belong to a dying man. But it was too late to turn back, the bargain was struck in blood and gold. The sun began to dip behind the jagged horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the village square, but the heat of the crowd's judgment felt more oppressive than the afternoon glare. As Sarah stepped down from the podium, the silence that had greeted her sacrifice cuddled into a cruel, rhythmic chanting. Abina led the charge, her face twisted in a mask of artificial pity that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Look at our little saint," Abina cried out, her voice carrying over the heads of the gathered villagers. "She's so desperate for a roof over her head that she's willing to change the diapers of a ghost. Tell us, Sarah, does the cripple's maid get a uniform, or just a lifetime of scrubbing floors for a man who can't even thank her?" A wave of tittering laughter followed, ripples of mockery that stained the dignity of the moment. The other village girls joined in, their whispers loud enough to bruise. They spoke of Sarah's wasted youth and how her beauty would wither in the shadow of a rusted wheelchair. One threw a clump of dry earth that grazed Sarah's shoulder, leaving a brown smudge on her modest cotton dress. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't look at the girls she had once called friends, nor did she acknowledge the stinging words that branded her a servant rather than a bride. She kept her spine straight, her chin tilted upward, though her pulse strummed like a trapped bird against her throat. Her focus was entirely on the small, rectangular slip of paper held in Pastor Babs's weathered hand. To the rest of Willow Creek, it was a symbol of her shame, but to Sarah, it was the only air Papa Smith had left to breathe. It was the surgery that would mend his lungs, the gold that would banish the debt collector from their doorstep, and the peace of mind her grandfather deserved in his twilight years. When the pastor finally pressed the check into her palm, the paper felt heavy, as if it were weighted with the gravity of her entire future. "You are doing a noble thing, child," the pastor whispered, though he wouldn't meet her eyes. Sarah didn't answer. She folded the check carefully and tucked it into the hidden pocket of her skirt, pressing her hand over it to feel its solid reality. The jeers of Cripple's maid continued to echo behind her as she walked away, but they sounded like distant thunder, scary, perhaps, but unable to touch the girl who had already walked through fire to save the only man who had ever truly loved her. She didn't look back at the shadowed figure in the wheelchair, she only looked toward home, where the smell of sickness was about to be replaced by the scent of hope. The wedding was not held in the sun-drenched sanctuary of the village church, but in the damp, shadow-choked parlor of the parish house, as if the union were a secret that needed to be kept from the light of day. There were no flowers, no joyous hymns, and no feast to follow. The only sound was the scratching of a pen on a marriage license and the heavy, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed to be counting down the seconds of Sarah's freedom. Isaiah remained a specter in the center of the room. He was still draped in that heavy, suffocating wool blanket, his head bowed so low that his chin rested against his chest. He did not look at the woman pledging her life to him, nor did he acknowledge the presence of Pastor Babs, who rushed through the liturgy as if he were reciting a funeral rite. Throughout the entire ceremony, Isaiah maintained a harrowing silence. Not a grunt of affirmation, not a sigh of weariness, just a stillness so absolute it felt unnatural, like the calm before a devastating storm. When the moment came to exchange the rings, Sarah's breath hitched. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she sought his left hand beneath the folds of the blanket. She expected to touch the frail, clammy skin of a man who had spent years wasting away in a chair. She expected to feel the brittle bones of a beggar. But as her skin met his, a jolt of pure electricity surged up her arm, stopping the breath in her lungs. His hand was not cold. It was radiating a fierce, hidden heat. As she slid the cheap brass band onto his finger, her thumb brushed against his palm and the underside of his knuckles. They were not soft or atrophied. His skin was thick with hard, dense calluses, the kind earned from years of gripping steel, not the arms of a wheelchair. The muscles beneath his skin felt like cold iron, vibrant and full of a terrifying, suppressed power. For a fleeting second, Sarah's eyes darted up to the shadow beneath his hat. She felt a sudden, icy chill crawl down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This was not the hand of a man who was dying. This was the hand of a warrior, a man accustomed to violence and command. Her heart began to drum a frantic warning against her ribs. As Pastor Babs pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah's fingers didn't move, but the sheer strength radiating from that single touch told Sarah everything she needed to know. She hadn't just married a mystery. She had invited a predator into her world, and the silent man in the chair was far more dangerous than the village of Willow Creek could ever imagine. The transition from the dusty roads of Willow Creek to the secluded mountain estate was a journey into a different world. The iron gates grown open to reveal a sprawling manor of glass and stone, illuminated by soft, recessed lighting that made the surrounding forest look like a velvet curtain. Sarah sat stiffly in the back of the silent luxury vehicle, her hands folded over her wedding dress, staring at the motionless silhouette of Isaiah beside her. When the car stopped, two somber-faced men in dark suits lifted Isaiah into his wheelchair and wheeled him into the grand foyer. The air inside smelled of expensive sandalwood and cold secrets. With a curt nod from one of the men, the staff vanished into the shadows of the house, leaving Sarah alone with her silent husband in the center of the cavernous room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Sarah's heart. She stepped toward the wheelchair, her voice a fragile thread in the dark. Isaiah, let me help you to your room. You must be exhausted. The man in the chair didn't answer. Instead, his shoulders began to straighten, the slumped posture she had known for weeks dissolving into a terrifyingly broad frame. Slowly, with a fluid grace that defied everything she believed to be true, Isaiah gripped the arms of the chair. He didn't struggle, he simply rose. He stood taller than any man Sarah had ever seen, his presence filling the room with an overwhelming, predatory energy. He shed the multi-tone wool blanket like a serpent shedding dead skin, revealing a custom-tailored tactical shirt that clung to the hard planes of his chest. Sarah backed away, her heel catching on her hem. You are faking it. You let me pity you. You let the whole village mock you while you sat there like a statue. Isaiah turned, his eyes no longer downcast but piercing and sharp as shattered glass. Pity is a cheap emotion, Sarah. Anyone can give it. I wasn't looking for a nurse, and I certainly wasn't looking for someone who wanted my bank account. He took a slow, heavy step toward her, his shadow looming over her trembling form. I am a man with enemies who have spent years trying to find my weakness. I needed to know if there was one soul left in this world who would choose a broken man over a bag of gold. You chose the beggar to save your grandfather. You gave your life for a man you thought had nothing to give you back. He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his hard mouth. In this house, the wheelchair is dead. But out there, the world still thinks I'm a ghost. And if you want to keep your grandfather alive and this village safe, you will help me keep that lie breathing. The sprawling manor, which had seemed like a sanctuary moments ago, suddenly felt like a beautifully constructed trap. Isaiah moved to a wall of monitors hidden behind a mahogany cabinet, the blue light of the screens casting sharp, jagged angles across his face. He didn't look like a groom, he looked like a commander in a war room. Sarah stood by the velvet curtains, her bridal lace looking absurdly fragile against the cold steel and stone of the room. "Why the village, Isaiah?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why the wheelchair? Why me?" Isaiah didn't turn around, his fingers dancing across a keyboard with little efficiency. "Because the men who want me dead expect me to be hiding in a high-rise in Dubai or a bunker in London," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "They are looking for a titan, a man with a private army. They aren't looking for a broken beggar in a forgotten hole like Willow Creek. And they certainly aren't looking for a wife whose only dowry was her grandfather's medical bills." He finally turned, his gaze heavy with a truth that chilled her to the bone. "You weren't just a choice, Sarah. You were my camouflage. Your virtue, your poverty, your reputation, it's the perfect curtain to draw across my life. No one suspects the cripples made of being married to the man who holds the keys to their downfall." The weight of his words crashed over her. The marriage wasn't just a sacrifice for Papa Smith, it was an entry into a world of shadows. Isaiah explained that he was a disowned heir who had uncovered a conspiracy within his own family's global empire, a secret so vast that his own blood had placed a price on his head. He had vanished into the chair to survive, waiting for the right moment to strike back. "You've traded a debt collector for an assassin, Sarah," he said, stepping closer until she could smell the cold rain and expensive soap on his skin. "This house is a fortress, but it is also a cage. You cannot call your friends. You cannot send letters. Every move you make is now a matter of national security." Sarah looked down at her wedding ring, the brass band now feeling like a shackle of solid lead. She had saved Papa Smith's life, yes, but in doing so, she had walked into a crossfire. She wasn't just a wife or a servant anymore, she was the most valuable secret in a war she didn't understand. The golden lights of the chandelier above seemed to dim, and for the first time, Sarah realized that the silence of the estate wasn't peace, it was the breath-holding stillness of a hunt. The alarm didn't sound like a bell, it was a low, visceral thrum that vibrated through the floorboards of the manor, signaling that the shadows had finally caught up. Outside, the flash of silent infrared beams swept across the tree line, and the distant crunch of boots on gravel told a story of impending violence. Isaiah stood by the reinforced window, his silhouette cold and sharp, a handgun appearing in his grip with practiced ease. He turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable, and shoved the heavy leather duffel bag into her hands. Through the unzipped corner, the dull glint of gold bars and stacks of high-denomination bills mocked the simplicity of her old life. "The back service tunnel leads to a forest trail," he commanded, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "There's enough in there to buy 10 houses in the city and keep Papa Smith in luxury for a century. Go. They aren't here for a village girl, they are here for me." Sarah looked at the bag, then at the man who had spent weeks pretending to be broken just to find one person he could trust. The weight of the gold felt disgusting, like a bribe for her desertion. If she ran, she would have her grandfather's safety, but she would leave behind the only man who had ever looked at her and seen a partner rather than a servant. She dropped the bag, the heavy thud echoing in the hollow room. "I didn't marry a bank account, Isaiah. And I didn't marry a coward." The first window shattered downstairs. Isaiah moved to intercept, but Sarah grabbed his arm, her eyes bright with the quick-thinking survivalism of the woods. "Wait," she hissed. "You're thinking like a soldier, but they're hunting like wolves. They've bypassed the high-tech sensors, which means they know your systems. But they don't know this land." She led him not toward the sleek, metal-reinforced panic room, but down into the root cellar, a damp, earthen space the architects had ignored. She used the old village trick of ghosting, masking their scent with the pungent herbs stored for winter and arranging the dust and cobwebs to look undisturbed. As the heavy boots of the assassins thundered through the marble halls above, Sarah pressed her back against the cool earth, her hand interlaced with Isaiah's. In the suffocating darkness, she felt his grip tighten, no longer the clinical hold of a strategist, but the desperate clench of a man realizing he was no longer alone. While the professionals searched the high-tech corners of his golden cage, they missed the two souls hidden in the dirt. In that silent trial of loyalty, Sarah proved that her village-born grit was more powerful than any weapon he owned. She had stayed when the goal told her to run, and for the first time, the hunter realized he had finally found his home. The dust of Willow Creek had always tasted of stagnant dreams and ancient gossip, but today, the air was shattered by the low, predatory hum of an arriving convoy. A fleet of midnight black SUVs, their windows opaque and menacing, rode through the main square, forcing the local merchants to pull back their stalls in bewilderment. When the lead vehicle came to a halt in front of the parish house, the door opened to reveal a man the village simply did not recognize. Isaiah stepped out, no longer shrouded in multi-term wool or slumped in a rusted chair, but standing with a towering, athletic grace in a charcoal grey tailored suit. He reached back into the car, his hand, warm and calloused, finding Sarah's. She emerged draped in emerald green silk that shimmered like a forest after rain, her gaze no longer downcast but radiant with a quiet, newfound authority. The village fell into a deathly silence. Abina stood on the porch of the general store, her mouth agape, the mockery she had prepared dying in her throat as she took in the sight of the cripples made a looking like a queen. Pastor Babs hurried down the steps, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he stammered a greeting, his eyes darting frantically between Isaiah's sturdy legs and the luxury vehicles. Sarah. Isaiah. What is the meaning of this transformation? Isaiah didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into the center of the square, his voice projected with the command of a man who had reclaimed his throne. Months ago, you stood on this very spot and put a price on a human life, Isaiah said, his eyes locking onto Pastor Babs and then shifting to the trembling Abina. You thought you were selling a girl to a beggar to hide your own debts and your own cruelty. You mocked her virtue because you didn't understand the value of a heart that gives without asking. He gestured to a man in a suit who stepped forward with a stack of legal documents. I didn't come back for an apology, Isaiah continued, his voice echoing off the weathered buildings. I came back to announce a change in ownership. As of this morning, I have purchased every acre of Willow Creek, the land, the shops, and even this parish house. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, and Abina turned pale, clutching her shawl. But before the fear could turn to panic, Sarah stepped forward, her hand resting on Isaiah's arm. We didn't buy this village to rule it, she said, her voice filled with a grace that silenced the wind. We bought it to heal it. This village will no longer be a place where the poor are sold to the highest bidder. We are building a modern clinic for men like my grandfather, a school for girls who think they have no choice, and a sanctuary for anyone the world has called broken. She looked directly at Abina, not with spite, but with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. The reign of judgment in Willow Creek was over, the era of mercy had begun. The seasons shifted in Willow Creek, but for the first time in generations, the change did not bring dread. The village had been reborn into a sanctuary of white stone and glass, anchored by a state-of-the-art medical clinic that stood where a derelict warehouse once rotted. At its entrance, Papa Smith stood tall, his breath deep and clear, no longer a rattling ghost of a man. He moved among the patients with a clipboard and a smile, presiding over the facility not as an administrator, but as a living testament to the miracle Sarah had bought with her courage. Near the bottom of the clinic's marble steps, a woman in a plain, stained apron scrubbed the stone with rhythmic, repetitive motions. It was Abina. There was no mockery left in her eyes, only a quiet, humbled focus as she earned her keep in the very house of mercy she had once ridiculed. That evening, the sun dipped low, casting a liquid gold light over the sprawling estate Sarah now called home. As she entered the grand foyer, her silk skirts whispering against the floor, she stopped. There, positioned in a place of prominence beneath a soaring archway, sat the old, rusted wheelchair. Its leather was cracked, its metal pitted with the scars of the road, looking entirely out of place amidst the opulence of the manor. Isaiah appeared from the shadows of the hallway, his presence no longer a source of terror, but a steady, grounding heat. He came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity of a man who had finally found his peace. Sarah looked from the battered chair to her husband, a faint crease of confusion on her brow. "Why do you keep it, Isaiah?" she asked softly. "It represents a time of such darkness, a lie that almost broke us. Why keep it in the heart of our home?" Isaiah squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on the rusted frame as if seeing the man he used to be. "I keep it because it is the most honest thing I own," he replied, his voice thick with a rare, raw emotion. "That chair was my armor, but it was also a mirror. It showed me the ugliness of the world, Sarah. It showed me how quickly people turn away from what they cannot use." He turned to her, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. "But most of all, it reminds me of the moment I found you. Because while the rest of the world looked down on me, you were the only one who looked me in the eye and saw a human being. I keep it so I never forget that I was saved not by my wealth, but by the girl who was brave enough to love a beggar." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the shadows of the trees dance across the old metal. The story that had begun with a desperate bargain and a silent vow had ended in a legacy of grace. The wheelchair was no longer a symbol of disability or deception, it was a monument to the truth that the highest throne in the world is nothing compared to the strength of a virtuous heart. Together, they turned away from the relics of the past and walked into the light of their shared future. Thanks for watching. More heart-touching stories coming in this week. Stay tuned to this channel and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to grow our little family.